Because a lot of times when you are looking for franchise candidates, you want someone who can really understand that the value of the model is that it's been proven. There's no need to recreate or alter it because we know it works. Franchising bridges the gap between business ownership and success because that model is proven. So it's like a blueprint. If owners just buy into that and embrace that model, it's going to bridge that success over to where the business ownership is. The more your business relies on an owner, one person, the less valuable that is. Because if you take that owner out that business, you have nothing, right? You just have tools. But if you have a business that's built around processes and have everything in place so that if you take one person, you take that owner out of the business and it continues to generate and operate like normal, that's what people will pay top dollar for.
Over 40 years in business, 19 franchise brands, and over 5,000 franchises. If you've never heard of Neighborly, it's about time you do. Today, I sat down with Brian Woods, who is a highly respected name in franchising and oversees 7 brands for Neighborly. Now, if you aren't familiar with one of the biggest and most powerful names in franchising, then you get to do that today. In this episode, I talk with Brian about what makes the difference between franchise owners that fail and the ones that succeed. His answer was interesting. We also discussed franchise resales and something unique that Neighborly does and offers with franchise resales that not many other franchisors are doing, if any of them at all. Then we dive into the topic of multi-unit franchise ownership, how it works, who is it for, how do you scale, and what's unique with Neighborly with multi-unit franchise ownership that gives franchisees the ability to diversify their franchise portfolio. Now, this is an episode to get a sneak peek into a franchisor's perspective that I think you'll find interesting, because I know I did. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the episode. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Franchise Empire Show. I'm here with Mr. Brian Woods. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So there's so much to unpack together, right? Because there's a couple of things that I find very interesting and fascinating about you, your background, which is I want to dive into a little bit about how you got into franchising, because I think that's a very interesting story to me, and kind of how you ended up on the franchise development side of things, how you ended up at Neighborly, which is, the 800-pound gorilla, in the franchising world. So first and foremost, I think it's important for people to even know like who Neighborly is, and then we can dive a little bit into your background a little bit. But tell us a little bit about Neighborly, because I looked up some of the stats and it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, no, we are essentially the largest home services franchisor, right? We have over 19 franchise concepts that service the home. Either our franchise concepts either repair the home, maintain the home, or enhance the home. So out of those 19 franchise concepts, we have over 5,300 franchise locations. They're serving about 19 service verticals. And, we have additional franchise concepts outside of the United States, right? We're in over 9 countries. So we are, well diverse from a geographic perspective. And, one of the things that makes Neighborly really special is our code of values, right? We live our code of values, and we like to call it living rich, RICH. R is for respect, I is for integrity, C is customer focus, and H is having fun in the process. So everything that we do as a franchisor, we like to make sure that it's embedded in those code of values. One of the other, interesting things about, Neighborly is the fact that since we have so many franchise concepts, it really attracts a great, diverse franchise base, right? So we have some folks that are in our businesses that either have started in the trades, but more importantly, we have been attracting more and more candidates that have no home services experience whatsoever, right? We're looking for, executive, CEO-minded leaders that can be, very impactful in their communities and have an impact as an employer of choice in their community. So being that largest franchisor gives us that opportunity to have that reach to attract those kind of candidates.
Oh, I'm sure. So here's a question. All right. So in order to pass the neighborly test and become, a part of the neighborly family, did you have to memorize all of the brands? And do you have to be able to recite them on demand?
No, I actually can recite mine, right? I am the group vice president of repair. So there are 7 repair brands out of those 19 franchise concepts in the United States. So I can recite mine quickly, right? So Mr. Rooter, Mr. Electric, Mr. Appliance, Mr. Handyman, AirServe, Precision Garage Door, and Glass Doctor. So those 7 are the brands that I cover on a daily basis from a strategic perspective. But if you were to ask the average neighborly employee, they may not be able to mention all 19 in one fell swoop.
I could see that being like a running joke where on demand, if someone calls you or texts you, you got to be able to recite all of them in one shot. If not, you're wearing a silly hat for the day or something like that.
Well, from my perspective, because I at my level, I work at the macro level, so I feel I can probably get maybe 90% without stopping. But there's always going to be 1 or 2 that may slip my mind. But the more you're around the organization, the more you're around the brands, they do start to become more and more second nature to you.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, we actually had someone who's in our system, in our zero profitable franchise system, recently sign an agreement for Mr. Electric. I won't say his name here, but so yeah, to me, it's here's an interesting conversation, I think, which is that, so we do these group coaching calls as a part of our system. People can hop on and they do these group coaching calls, and they're able to learn from each other as they're going through the process after they sign their franchise agreement. And sometimes people will come on and they'll say, hey, I'm still struggling. Should I really buy a franchise, or should I start my own business? Or they're looking at an emerging concept that maybe has one franchisor, right? But they're not doing anything different in the marketplace, right? It's different if it's okay, you're up and coming, disrupting an industry. And I always ask them, I'm like, well, what got you looking at franchising in the first place? When they start saying, well, there's a system, someone's done it before, I don't have to figure it all out. And it's well, okay, so starting a business, do you get that? No. Or, okay, this emerging franchisor. So when I think about having franchising, to me, neighborly is kind of the epitome of having a system. I mean, because it's one thing to be able to have one successful franchise concept, right? To be a franchisor, have one brand, but to have over 19 brands in the same overall niche, right? If we think about niche from the higher perspective, home services, that's pretty fascinating. What are your thoughts on that topic in terms of, people who may, I guess here's a better question. Who is not a good fit for neighborly? Because we know that for people who want the system, easy, who's not a good fit?
I think for us, someone who's not a good fit is someone who cannot truly embrace our systems to a T, right? Because a lot of times when you are looking for franchise candidates, you want someone who can really, understand that the value of the model is that it's been proven, right? So it's no need to recreate or alter it because we know it works. Sometimes you may have candidates that come in and think they may be able to outsmart our model or outsmart the system. So what ends up happening is that those candidates or those owners don't see the success that other owners may have because they aren't implementing the system like we are actually advising them to do. So, someone who cannot follow our system is someone who probably won't be a good fit. Someone who doesn't have the code of values aligned with ours, right? So having honesty, integrity, right? Operating above the line. These are things that we have in our own code of values as neighborly team members. We want that same kind of code of value in our franchise owners that we actually bring in. So if you don't have integrity, if you don't have honesty, you won't be a good fit either, right? Someone who's, not a natural leader, right? We want leaders that go out to be able to lead a team, to be able to recruit and motivate a team to excel, right? So if you're not an actual leader, that will probably make you an owner that won't be able to truly see the upside of their business. So those are just a few things that, I think really would stand out in regards to not being a fit. And it's just, some of your points you said earlier about the value of franchising, right? So I did a presentation a while ago about how franchising bridges the gap between business ownership and success, right? Because that model is, like you said, it's proven. So it's like a blueprint. If owners just buy into that and embrace that model, it's going to bridge that success over to where the business ownership is. You don't have to recreate the wheel. You don't have to go through the blood, sweat, and tears, the time, the investment, running up the resources to find out what works, because that's neighborly. The fact that we have more than one concept, we truly understand what works, but more importantly, what doesn't work. And when, candidates can really understand that value, we see that they come in and they're ready to hit the ground running by embracing our system and being successful.
So I get multiple emails a week from companies asking to run ads on the podcast. I could have ads if I wanted to, but I don't. So there are two ways that you can help to support me and the podcast to keep it ad-free. First is to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment, even a smiley face if you have nothing to say. The YouTube algorithm only shows the video to more people based on the likes and comments on the video. So your comment could help someone get exposed to this, and not to sound too cheesy, but it could legitimately change their life. Lastly, go ahead and share this with someone that you think will enjoy this episode. Maybe someone who loves business and entrepreneurial stuff, or maybe it's someone who's been saying that they want to own their own business for forever. You can message it to them directly or share it on your social media. It would mean the world to me. You guys rock. Enjoy. Yeah, good points. And one of the questions I was going to ask you was like, what makes you have such a unique vantage point, and which is like, what makes the difference? Because this is what always fascinates me is you have a franchise brand, right? So you have the system, and let's say in theory, it's a brand that has, over about 100 or so franchisees in the concept, right? So in order to get there, like there has to be people in theory, hopefully, who are, successful in the franchise brand. It always just fascinates me how someone can fail and then other people can succeed. And what's the difference? I mean, outside of, territories, right? And, maybe the geography, like what, outside of that, I know you hit on a couple of them, but what do you think really makes the difference? Like, is it a DNA thing? Is it they're wired to be entrepreneurs? What do you see?
I'm going to consider it grit. We call it grit, right? And it's kind of like sports. Sometimes, it can be, athletes that have similar talent and different skill sets that can make them successful. But there are some that just don't pan out the way you think they should. It's the grit, right? Meaning that you're going to have some people that's just going to be tenacious and making sure that they're following the system. They're going the extra mile, right? They're setting goals. And that's another thing, right? Sometimes you just have to be goal-oriented, because we've seen studies that show that when people have a goal, they are more likely to achieve it versus someone that doesn't actually have a written goal in place. So they're goal-focused. They know what they are trying to accomplish, and they have a vision. So there's a lot of intangibles that go into it as well, right? Because I know you said the tangible piece of the territory and the system, those things are all there. But the difference is going to be the heart. It's the grit, the commitment to roll up your sleeves and really get into the business, right? And understand how to drive that business going forward. That tends to make the difference between a great owner and a good owner.
I think that's one of my favorite answers that I've ever heard of that, because I'm a true believer in that. You were talking about how you used to play basketball, and, I've been an athlete all my life, and there's a certain mindset that comes with athletes, right? Where it's kind of hardwired into them, but entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart. It can be, the analogy I use is like having kids. And we were just talking about our kids earlier, and especially at the stage where we are with 1.5 and 4.5, sometimes, some days it's like, this is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
I've been there. Still hard.
but I wouldn't trade it for the world. And that's what I feel like entrepreneurship is like.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, because you can truly embrace the results, right? Because again, with children, they test your patience. You could be very tired and you still have to do things. But when you see your children advance, when they're developing, when they do something that they've never done before, it's all worth it, right? The rest that you're not getting, the commitment you're putting into them, it's all worth it once you see that progress in your children. And to your point, you wouldn't trade it in the world, right? When you're going through it, you would probably wish you had more time to yourself and had more rest, but it all makes sense once you see the progression and the advancement in your children. Same thing with the business, right? Sleepless nights, you're putting in a lot of time, a lot of effort, but when you see your business, thriving, flourishing, hitting your budget numbers, right? Hitting any other marketing goals that you have, it's always going to be worth it in the end.
Yeah. Now you're up there with Neighborly, right? You're the group vice president, as you said. You oversee the franchise development for, 7 different brands, which is incredible. How did you get there? How did you get started in the franchising world and then end up at Neighborly?
Yes. So one thing you're going to always find out is anyone that's in franchise development or franchising in general, they stumbled into it some kind of way, right? There's not a lot of professionals that started out franchising at the very beginning, right? I went to University of Michigan undergrad. I came out with a finance degree. So started on Wall Street, investment banking for the first 6 or 7 years of my career, transitioned out of banking into corporate finance, where I was working at PepsiCo for a few years, just doing corporate finance, modeling, forecasting, et cetera. Took a break from the corporate life and went back to grad school, went to University of Texas at Austin, went to McCombs and got my MBA in finance. And that's where I came out and wanted to do corporate strategy. So this was the first big transition in my career, going from finance to corporate strategy. I actually ended up at AT&T, where I was.
What does corporate strategy mean?
Corporate strategy in a nutshell is literally solving problems, right? Creating pathways to solve a problem, right? You have your current state, which is where you are now. You have a future state, where you want to be. Strategy is everything in between, right? What's the plan? What's the goals? What do you have to execute to get to that future state, right? So there's a lot of growth strategies. So that's what you hear a lot of, people talk about growth strategies. That's exactly what it is. We have, 50 franchise locations now. And when they get to 200 in, 5 years, what are the steps that need to be taken to get there? So from a strategic perspective, I started at AT&T, working on those strategic, initiatives. And then, I got a call from Motel 6, right? Motel 6 is, one of the largest economy hotel chains in the country, to come over and create a strategy team in their franchise development department, right? So I came over, I created a team of analysts and things like that to help with the growth strategy. Where can Motel 6 expand throughout the United States? Create a lead generation strategy to identify the right candidates that would be good to open up these hotels, right? So really bit my teeth into franchising through the strategic route. One of the strategic projects that I worked on was how can we diversify our franchisee network? So instead of just going to hotel operators, can we look at private equity groups or hedge funds who have the cash to invest in hotels, but not necessarily be open to operating, right? So we would have to create a strategy on how to operate them for these groups. So coming from the investment banking world, I really understood that financial kind of framework and how these groups actually thought. So I had an opportunity to present a couple franchise development deals to a couple hedge fund groups when I was at Motel 6. And that was my first foray into true franchise development, working with these PE groups. Long story short, I really liked the engagement. I really liked networking with these investors and talking, and ended up switching out of that strategy role into a pure franchise development role, where I was responsible for expanding the Motel 6 and Studio 6 hotel franchise in the western part of the United States. So I had a group of about 2 to 3 people who helped me develop those that franchise throughout the western part. Did that for about 6 years and got a call from Neighborly, where at the time, Neighborly was looking for a group vice president to be responsible for 4 brands, right? So within 2 years, it went from 4 to 7. So for 4 brands, have that strategic lens on how to guide these brands for growth, right? Doing the exact same things I was doing in Motel 6. So that's how I ended up coming over to Neighborly. And then the repair group went from 4 to 7 really quickly through acquisitions and reorganization. And now that's what I'm responsible for, helping to drive these brands through the help of the teams that sell them on where to go, what's the right, venues for us to identify the right kind of candidates to come in to keep the brand going strong.
There's so much to unpack there. That's so fascinating. I feel like we could do a whole podcast just diving into the background and all the things you learned in lesson. Like, it sounds so exciting. You're working for a huge hotel franchise and pitching PE groups and investment groups. I mean, that's really fascinating. And then shifting to what you do now and helping grow the development of brands. It's you make it sound so glamorous, and I'm sure it's not.
Well, it's a lot of grunt work in there too. It's it has its high moments, but a lot of times it's a lot of grunt work, and it's not really attractive, but it gets you there, right? It's a lot of learning in it. So I really appreciated that experience.
Yeah. So let's talk about the hotel franchises first. Who does, outside of investment groups, who does buy hotels? And what does the investment level even look like to do something like that?
Yeah. And the investment ranges by, they call it chain scale, right? So economy, which is what you're going to see, which is Motel 6, Studio 6. You might see some choice hotel brands that are economy. Those investment ranges are a lot lower. So you're probably looking anywhere between the $6 to $10 million range for a hotel in the economy segment, right? Usually the people who are operating these hotels outside of those investment groups are going to be existing hotel operators, right? These are folks who already own 1 or 2, and they're looking to diversify their hotel portfolio by adding different brands and adding more coverage to their current portfolio, right? A lot of families, right? A lot of family funds that come together who have hotel experience, they invest, right? And depending on the size of their fund, they may upgrade from an economy to maybe a mid-scale, right? Or something like a Marriott. You might see a Hilton Garden Inn or something like that. So, and it goes all the way up into, the top levels, which is, the Ritz-Carltons of the world, the JW Marriotts, right? Those are, 100 million plus projects. So depending on, your investment size and what you can actually raise, it dictates exactly where you're going to play at in the hotel space. So usually those family funds and hotel operators looking to expand.
So that's so interesting to me. Everyone, you start talking franchising, people think McDonald's and Chick-fil-A, and it's fascinating to me that everyone thinks of food when they think of franchising, but 4,000 different franchises, and then I feel like that's a perfect segue to talk about home services, which is why home services? Why, give us your consensus on that space, and maybe give us some cons too. What are the pros and cons of the home services space as opposed to everyone and their mom comes and says, "Hey, I want to own a Chick-fil-A." You're like, well, you don't actually own anything, but okay.
No, that's great. I mean, and I'm biased because especially the brands I cover are repair brands. One of the biggest pros I feel is that this is one of the most recession-resistant industries you have, right? When it comes to your home, you have to get things repaired. These aren't things that you can put off for later, right? If your sink is broken and is leaking water everywhere, you're not going to wait 6 weeks until, you get paid. You got to find out how to get it fixed right now because it's going to cause more damage. So the home services space, I feel, is really recession resistant, right? Also, when I look at the overall home services inventory, right, or this a home inventory, we see that the population increase is driving more homes coming online, right? New construction of homes to accommodate the growth and population. And then also I look at the transition from what I call it do it yourself to do it for me, right? There was a phase in one time where, maybe you and I would just take a Saturday afternoon or Saturday morning, pull up YouTube, go online and try to figure out how to fix something in our home. But now we value our time, right? You have children. I have children now. I have a basketball game to go to at 11. I don't have 2 or 3 hours to spend trying to figure out how to fix my sink, right? So the fact that more and more people are electing to use that time wisely, they're going to be outsourcing a lot of those services, right? And then the fact that home ownership rates continue to rise as well. More people are owning homes. So the fact that more people are owning homes, there's going to be more need for home services. And one of the biggest things that's driving that increase in home ownership are millennials, right? Millennials are really driving home ownership. And it's funny, there is a study showing that only 1 in 4 millennials knows the difference between a flathead and a Phillips screwdriver. So if you don't have the skills, you have to call someone, right? So these are just a lot of reasons why I feel like the home services space is so attractive, because we're going to be needed, and we're going to be needed whether the economy is booming or we're in a recession.
Yeah, we just had our the weirdest thing happen. Our hot water heater, we got like a crack in the nut that was connected to the hot water heater to the main water line.
Wow.
And yeah, so it started, it was there, I guess, for about maybe 4 or 5 days before I realized it. I was like,
wow.
Water at the garage, front of the garage door, and then figured it out. And it was this whole thing. And exactly to your point, I didn't really feel like spending $2,000 on a new hot water heater, but we did. And it's like, okay, great. If I didn't plan on spending $2,000 on anything, I'm pretty tight with my money. I don't like to spend. And so it is a good point, which is things are going to happen, and it's a matter of necessity, right? Which is really, really interesting. Hey, I hope you're enjoying the podcast episode so far. One of the most consistent things that we hear from people that reach out to us is that buying a franchise feels really confusing. There's so many options out there. It's a scary decision. They don't know how to vet or do the due diligence or really narrow down on the right franchise for them, and then they really feel alone in the process. You might be the only one in your family who's ever pursued buying a franchise or being an entrepreneur, or maybe you've tried to start a side hustle before, or other businesses like me. Like before franchising, I was not able to crack the code on entrepreneurship. I'd like to invite you to reach out and work with us. We've helped many clients buy franchises, get them profitable, or buy resale businesses that are thriving. I'm talking about highly profitable resales, great value. We've allowed many of our clients to actually quit their job right away and replace their income immediately. So if you want to work with me and my team on finding or buying a franchise, doing due diligence, vetting it, or resale, then go ahead and go to tarjohnson.com/consulting, and we're happy to see if we can help. All right, enjoy the rest of the episode. You recently wrote an article on multi-unit franchising. Before we dive into maybe a specific question, what are your thoughts on going multi-unit, and who is it for? Who shouldn't do multi-unit?
I think multi-unit is a great way to scale and build upon the things you do well, right? So if you're a great operator of a franchise concept, right, and you can replicate those same efficiencies, multi-unit franchising is for you, right? That means you could add more than one location, more than one unit. And the idea is to drive economies of scale throughout these locations while earning more money, right? And generating more money. So, we have a lot of multi-unit, owners within our franchise, right? And you can have multi-unit in a couple of different ways. So you can have multiple units of the same franchise concept, right? So we have some owners that have multiple Mr. Rooter or Mr. Electric locations, right? So you're now leveraging some of the things you're doing for the same concept across different units. Or you can have multi-units within different concepts, right? And we have a small percentage of our franchise network that have more than one concept, who may have a Mr. Rooter along with the Air Serve, along with a Mr. Electric, right? So now you're building, a little diversity within your portfolio while still using some of the baseline operational policies that you have so that you can share that across different locations. So it's really great for people who have a really strong management structure, because you need to have the right management structure in place to effectively be able to do that, right? So having the right people in place with the right expertise to truly replicate your operations, vision across those different locations, those are the people that we've seen to do very well at that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So I have a friend or acquaintance. She's been on the podcast before. She used to own the entire state of Oklahoma for Orange Theory, and now she owns a couple of markets for a franchise called Kidstrong. And she was saying that she said, it's actually harder to own one. It's harder to own one because there's no efficiency, there's no backups, it actually is easier at some point. I'm sure some people would probably, there might be some franchisees out there that would counter this argument gladly. But what's your perspective on that in terms of, how scaling can maybe actually be beneficial to quality of life as opposed to detrimental, which could be the thought process?
Yeah. And really the biggest piece of that is the fact that you're relying on a proven management structure that is more of a process, right? When you have one and you can't, like to your point, you can't really benefit from a lot of the processes because you're only dealing with one. So it's a lot of time being added there. But if you're adding more locations, more units, you can then create a structure that could be more efficient in the operations of that, which will in fact give you more time personally, right? Quality of life. You're not going to have to be working like that because you're going to have the right management structure in place that's going to implement the structure and the strategy that you put forth in your first one. So it does sound a little counterintuitive, but we have seen the more that, operators scale up and open up more units, the more efficient their whole operations get and the better the quality of life that they actually experience.
Yeah, we have someone in our system who he's now a franchisee of what's the inspection one? It just eluded me.
Housemaster?
Inspection. Housemaster?
For Neighborly?
Yeah.
It's
Housemaster.
Yes.
Yeah. So he owns a Housemaster. He's been a franchisee now, I think, for maybe around 6 months or so, doing well, loves it. And one of the things he keeps talking about is I'm excited to keep growing this and scaling this and eventually become a multi-brand owner, which is, unique to a company like Neighborly that has different brands. So what's the difference between multi-unit, multi-brand, and tell us about this whole thing? Because I don't think many people know about multi-brand.
Yes, and multi-brand is a very unique perspective, right? And a competitive advantage that Neighborly has with other franchisors. The fact that we have over 19 franchise concepts, it allows owners to start with one concept and then add on additional concepts into their territory, right? It's what we call it empire building, right? You have the opportunity to have 2 to 3 or maybe even 4 different concepts within your territory. And what you're doing is just increasing what we call the stickiness of your customers. Because if you have a Mr. Rooter and you're going to fix a plumbing issue, you can also refer your electrical or your cleaning services, right? You might want to have a Molly maid. So you can then, use those customers and maximize the value of those customers a lot more when you have more services to provide. And when it comes to homes, and you have a home, I have a home as well, there's so many different things that you need to have from a service perspective all the time, right? And a lot of times you don't really know what you need until something goes wrong. So when you're proactively building these relationships and your customers know the type of services that you have, when that fuse box blows, they're going to remember, oh yeah, my Mr. Rooter guy had told me that they have an electrical service as well. So I'll call and be able to make that connection, right? Because one of the other cool things with Neighborly is that we have a data analytics team, right, that really looks into the data of our consumers and the consumer behavior and the way they, use our different brands. So we have some data that shows that there are certain brands that's going to be used next for consumers based off of their behavior. So these are some of the analytics that we use that really make us attractive to coming into Neighborly, and then having that long-term thought process of owning multiple concepts, because we'll help you build it in a way to be successful. So really great. It's another good diversification play, but more importantly, it helps you build an empire.
Yeah, I like it. Franchise Empire Show. Build your empire. Let's go, man.
Let's do
Let's
it, man.
go.
I love it.
You're gonna have to co-brand a T-shirt or something.
Hey, I'm with it, man.
So one of the things I want to talk about is franchise resales, and Neighborly has something that's really unique, I think, in that regard. But before we go there, I'd love to hit on diversity. So you were telling me that you're the chairman of
Yes, I'm the chair of Neighborly's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee.
Cool. So, here's what's interesting for me personally from my experience is that, so I got my investment licenses when I was 19 years old. And so dropped out of college and became a financial advisor. And for me, there were two things that I was always used to. I was used to being, number one, the youngest in the room, number two, being the darkest in the room. And oftentimes there was no one else that looked like me in meetings. And so what does diversity in the franchise space mean to you? And give us a lay of the land. Where are we in terms of diversity in the franchise space, and where should we be looking?
Yeah. And I can empathize with you as well, in regards to being, the youngest at one time, but time has elapsed. So I'm not that young anymore, but I'm still one of the darkest and, one of my, passions and missions is to increase diversity, right? And not just in the leadership, but in the franchise ranks, right? So when it comes to diversity, what I see where we're mostly at in franchising is mainly in the fast food and the casual dining space, right? When I go to different conferences and conventions, when I see, diverse franchise owners, they're normally in that space. So one of the things that I've been trying to do is to try to educate, diverse candidates on other options, right? Because we talked about it earlier in your show where, many people go to Chick-fil-A or, McDonald's or something like that. But many people don't know that a lot of the home services, a lot of the fitness concepts, they're franchised, right? So I feel it's just a need to educate a little bit more so people truly understand that. Because if you're not interested in food, you might not consider yourself interested in franchising because you may think that's the only option that you have. So, I'm really trying to do my part in, being a part of podcasts, being a part of panels, speaking in different in venues and events to try to, get that word out so that people truly understand that you have some options within franchising that's not casual dining. And that's great for people, right? But, the investment may be too high, the interest might not be there. So for those folks, there is another way for you to get into franchise. So from a diversity perspective, I really want to use that as one of my key missions to drive that awareness. And at the end of the day, bring more diverse candidates within Neighborly, right? Bring more diverse owners into the system. And we have diversity within our brands, but, we have some opportunities to increase that.
Yeah, it's awesome. And, to your point, doing things like this, it helps to just raise awareness, right? Because, it's interesting how many young kids will reach out from watching my YouTube channel or the podcast or say, hey, I want to own a franchise one day. And I just think it's fascinating. So how do you think, it's great for us to get the people that are at the spot where they can buy now. How do we go and influence the younger generation and get them primed and prepped so that their aspiration is to one day, be a franchise owner and create more diversity or create generational wealth or whatever it is that they're looking to do?
It starts at the school level, right? High school, we need to incorporate more classwork and more curriculum around entrepreneurship, right? Because it starts there, right? Wanting to own your own business. And for me, I went to school to just learn how to go to college and get a job, right? So for me, it just happened to work out. But for others, that might not be their call, right? So by being exposed to entrepreneurship at an early age, it gives people more options going forward. And then even if you do decide to go to college, right? I went to University of Michigan. I went to, big schools. There weren't a lot of entrepreneurship, majors or programs that you can truly take to truly understand entrepreneurship. So I really like what Dr. John Hayes is doing at West Palm Beach University. It's the Titus School of Franchising. I was on his podcast maybe about 2 or 3 weeks ago. They're one of the only schools and colleges that has a franchising program, right? And if we can take that model and replicate that to other schools, it's going to help younger people understand that this is an option, and they'll mirror their steps going through school to be prepared to go into business and perhaps even invest in the franchise. So it's about early education, exposure, mentorship, so that, the younger generation could be prepared to do this.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it because I feel like they would get to benefit from some of the mistakes, as an example, that I avoided, which was from the age of 19 to 26, 27 was me starting 9 different businesses and failing before I finally found franchising. So maybe they could get ahead of the curve there.
Yeah. So it's just more of that, right? And more, exposure. What programs can we use, right? And also it might be teaming up with IFA, right? International Franchise Association. What can we do at a national level that can help, disseminate the information around franchising to young adults and millennials?
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk a little bit about resale. So one of the things that I found when I was kind of on the brokerage side for a little bit, and I'm not anymore. We operate in a very different way. But what I found interesting was I'd reach out for some neighborly resales when looking for clients, and they had this whole dedicated department and contacts for resales. And whoa, this is interesting. I hadn't really saw that before. Actually, I don't know that I've seen that for any other franchise concept. So first, talk a little bit about how Neighborly handles resales, and then I want to kind of unpack just resales in general.
Yeah, no worries. So that's another one of our unique, perspectives or competitive advantages that we have in the franchise space, is that we do have a dedicated team that's dedicated to resales, right? Alicia Yankee, our vice president of resales, does a great job in managing her team to help our owners sell their business, right? One of the things that we always like our owners to think about is, hey, not just with you starting your business, but there's going to be a time where you want to, maybe do something different and you want to exit the business, right? So we help you from creating it to actually exiting. So the fact that we have owners who have had their business for so long and they're looking for someone to buy it, we have a very structured process that identifies, qualified buyers to buy their business, right? And now, we continue to, build that because we have more owners, and more owners are aging in their business and they're looking to sell more. So we develop relationships with, different brokers and people looking to buy these businesses from them or from our owners, right? And we facilitate those transactions. And one of the great things about that is when it comes to the fees and the cost, in regards to selling your business, typically if you went to the business broker route, they can charge you anywhere between 10 and 12% to sell that, right? And in Neighborly, it's probably half of that. So from a seller's perspective, you actually save money working with Neighborly. And then also, too, there's not going to be a lot of people who are very familiar with home services and how to market and sell your business like we do, right? So the fact that we have that dedicated, team in that process, we're also more successful in getting these businesses sold. So very, unique service and benefit you have as being a Neighborly franchisor.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool process, and I do think that's a huge competitive advantage. It's one of the things that I tell people is that sometimes people go, Tarek, why did you sell your franchises? Well, one, I was 2,500 miles away.
Well,
so that's a contributing factor.
Yeah.
But the goal, like, you don't have to, that's the great thing about a franchise business. Like, you can sell it, and oftentimes you probably have a higher likelihood of selling it, and for more because of the value of the brand and the, that kind of enterprise value. And the goal is not to necessarily own it all your life. Maybe you want to pass it on to your kids. Maybe you don't. Maybe you want to work really hard for 10 or 15, 20 years and then be able to exit and enjoy your nest egg. And, I think simplifying that process definitely is a huge, huge advantage, because I personally sold our stores and represented myself to save the money on, hiring a business broker. And I'll tell you what, that was a process, man. That was a process. The cool thing is that I learned so much that I apply now. So it was a blessing, because a lot of the technical knowledge that I have now in terms of, how to go through that process of LOIs and purchase agreements and escrow and, all those different things. But I definitely, I don't think that's something someone wants to do, like trying to sell their business on their own.
And to your point, you said earlier, it's, the value you're getting when you sell, right? Because of that brand, but more importantly, the fact that you have that system in place, right? And I talk about this to our candidates coming in, the value of your business is always going to be valued off of EBITDA multiple or revenue multiple, right? And the multiple goes up the more systems, processes, people you have in place, right? Because the more your business relies on an owner, one person, the less valuable that is. Because if you take that owner out that business, you have nothing, right? You just have tools and stuff, right? But if you have a business that's built around processes and have everything in place, so that if you take one person, you take that owner out of the business and it continues to generate and operate like normal, that's what people will pay top dollar for. And that's why our proven successful model does that for a business over the years, so that you've built something very valuable when it's time to exit.
Yeah. So something that I find interesting, I have a buddy of mine that he owns a bunch of budget blinds, and he's grown his entire 7 territory portfolio all by buying resales and within the network and the system. So I'm just curious, how do you see franchisees selling and exiting to other franchisees within the system? And, I guess the benefit of getting access to kind of private deal flow that, wouldn't exist if you're not already a part of the franchise system.
Yeah, well, that's the biggest advantage, right? Our owners normally get the first heads up of these, businesses that's going to be open for sale, right? So, when you see an owner who's looking to build their business, that empire building phase, right? This is the first way to do it. They can start operating into a, acquisition state and acquiring and buying businesses that's already been built up, and they could just kind of fold it into their overall structure. So I see more and more owners doing that, right? And then from a franchise development perspective that we like is that we call it a new sale resale. So you have a lot of people who will purchase a business, but then they want to expand the territory a little more than where that existing business is. So it's basically buying it, and then they're going to buy another franchise next to it to expand their territory. So it counts as incremental growth for franchise development, and that's what I'm here for, incremental growth. So from a resale perspective, we're always trying to find that new sale, resale opportunity so that we still continue to grow versus just transferring ownership.
Yeah, so cool. I love resales in general. I just, the opportunity to step into a business that's up and running, or that you can kind of just hit the ground running. I think, it's helpful for a lot of people, right? Because so many people are trying to transition out of the corporate world. It takes some of the stress out of it. You were talking about how one of the things to increase the value of the business, or what you wind up selling it for, is how much you can take yourself out of that business. What are some of the other characteristics that you see maybe in some of the highest valued or higher selling resales, within, Neighborly or so on? Like, what else increases that value?
Their management structure, the size of their territory, right? That's one of the biggest things as well. Like if you have a business that, spans across, different counties and maybe even different states, right? Depending on where you are, that adds a lot of value to that resale. Having that management structure there also adds value. The marketing that they've invested over time to create a dominant market share, right? So this business may have 15, 20% market share in their territory. That's value, right? A buyer would want to, pay top dollar for a business that's dominating the market, right? So I think those are the top 3 or 4 things I feel that really drives overall value for resale.
Yeah. Cool, man. Awesome. Well, Brian, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for coming on. I feel like we covered a nice broad category of different topics. If anyone we'll link it up in the description, but if anyone wants to, get in contact with you or, take a look at, or just get some advice on kind of franchising overall, how can they find you? Where can they follow you?
First is to go to LinkedIn, look under my name, Brian Woods. That's the first one. Send me an email at brian.woods@nbly.com. Those are probably the best ways to get in contact with me. Would love to, talk a little bit more about Neighborly, about franchising it as a whole, right? Because obviously I work for Neighborly, but I'm a franchise professional first. And if I can educate and promote franchising and educate, I'm doing the right thing. So reach out to me that way. Would love to have those discussions.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for coming on.
All right. Thanks a lot.